The night was alive with fire and gunfire, a city crumbling under the weight of revolution. Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark ran through the smoke, clutching his infant son tightly. Bullets tore past him, shredding the air with menace. His breath was ragged, heart pounding, but his mission was clear. Keep his bloodline alive. 3 sharp bursts ended Andrew's flight. The soldier who caught him spat disdainfully and kicked the fallen prince's chest. "Garbage royalty's dead," he muttered. But the infant, hidden in a wooden crate near the docks, survived. A fragile secret slipping away from history's gaze. Alice of Battenberg, deaf to the chaos but not to loss, stood at the harbor's edge. Her world was a shadow of grief. Her husband was dead, her other children lost amid the violence. Only one fragile hope remained, the boy in the crate, destined to carry the weight of silence and shadow. The crate was no mere box. It was a womb of darkness, cold wood enclosing a child whose fate was intertwined with something deeper. Inside, Philip lay curled, unaware that this small prison would mark him forever. A vessel carrying more than just a boy, but a legacy of exile and haunting. As the crate was loaded onto the British ship, the flames licked the sky, painting the harbor in a hellish glow. The sailors moved unaware of the boy hidden within, yet shadows seemed to stir, restless and ancient, watching from the edges of the wooden walls, waiting for their moment. The city behind them burned, a distant roar, swallowing cries and footsteps. The ship cut through dark waters, carrying not just a child but the fragile remains of a fallen dynasty. Each wave seemed to whisper warnings, secrets buried beneath the sea's cold surface. Philip's tiny fists clenched in the crate, as if fighting unseen chains. The wood press tied a cage, and cradle merged into one. Outside, the world was collapsing. Inside, time stretched endlessly, filled only with muffled sounds and the rhythm of his heartbeat. Years later, Philip would recall fragments not in words but in dreams. Fire, and a woman's wide, unblinking eyes. He called her Mavra the Dark One. This shadow stitched into his childhood memories haunted him beyond reason, a presence no crown or distance could silence. That night, in the cradle of darkness, the boy's spirit met something older than fear. It was a whisper of grief and rage, a ghost refusing to let go. His breath echoed against wooden walls, a fragile heartbeat defying the silence that sought to swallow him whole. Raised far from Greece's flames, Philip battled unseen demons. Thunderstorms made him flinch, he whispered in Greek in his sleep. Hidden drawings filled with cryptic symbols spoke of a secret life beneath royal polish, a silent conversation between boy and shadow that no one understood. The palace whispered. 2 servants spoke of cold spots in his rooms, unexplained flickers of light, and animals refusing to cross certain thresholds. Even the queen remarked that part of the castle felt like a tomb. Was it superstition, or a curse born in that crate's darkness? The walls seemed to breathe, alive with echoes from the past. Portraits with eyes that followed silently, halls filled with footsteps no one claimed. Philip's world was half reality, half shadow play, a liminal space where history and haunting collided in quiet menace. His siblings were lost to the flames and gunfire, their absence a ghostly echo in his life. The queen's presence remained distant, a figure on the edges of his world. For Philip, the past was a cage, the crate a symbol of exile and secrets buried too deep to speak aloud. Alice's mind broke under grief and isolation, deaf and abandoned. She withdrew to a convent, her silent cries swallowed by stone walls. The boy in the crate carried her silence like a wound. His life would forever be marked by absence, by shadows no one dared confront. The scent of old wood and cold sea air clung to him through every season. No nursery lullabies could reach into that crate's memory. Only silence and the dull throb of fear. Even years later, that fear was a ghost at the edge of his waking moments. Philip's youth was a battle between appearances and reality. Groomed for royalty, he bore a hidden burden, an invisible prisoner trapped by memories older than himself. The crate's shadow clung to him like a second skin, turning royal destiny into a haunted legacy. What does it mean to be born with ghosts at your side? To carry the weight of a lost kingdom on shoulders too small to bear it. For Philip, the crate was cradle and coffin alike, the start of a journey through fire, shadow, and silence. Every step forward was haunted by the crate's memory, a reminder that some pasts refused to stay buried. The boy sealed away in darkness would grow into a man haunted by history and something far older, waiting patiently in the shadows. His story began in a crate, but it did not end there. The darkness he carried would follow him across continents, into palaces and warships, into dreams and waking nightmares. What starts in shadow rarely finds peace and light. The whispers of that night followed him into every room. Servants locked doors a moment longer, spoke in hushed tones about the boy who saw things no one else did. Even as a child, Philip seemed marked, not by crown or title, but by something unseen and unspoken. One stormy night, thunder crashing like the cannon fire he never knew, he retreated to his chambers. Shadows danced across the walls, and the air grew heavy with a chill that no fire could lift. The crate's ghosts were alive again, surrounding him in cold silence. No royal tutor could teach him how to wrestle with shadows. His childhood was a war between light and dark. Between history's harsh truths and the secrets his family refused to name. The crate was a symbol, a reminder that some prisons have no bars, only memories. He once told a close friend that he felt watched by something that could not be seen. His voice dropped to a whisper as he recounted dreams filled with fire and figures cloaked in black. Was it madness or legacy? The answer lay hidden beneath layers of silence. His relationship with the queen was distant, formal, but he never spoke of the crate, the exile, the shadows that stalked his steps. Royal protocol demanded silence, but his soul screamed in the quiet. Every public smile masked the boy locked inside a wooden coffin of memory. Even the castle's animals sensed it. Cats refused to enter certain rooms. Dogs growled at empty corners. The servants called it the prince's shadow, a curse born from a past too painful to speak aloud. Yet no one dared question the crown's silent guardian. Through years of exile, war and duty, Philip carried the crate's burden. The echoes of that night shaped his decisions, his fears, and his silences. It was a legacy hidden behind medals and uniforms, behind smiles and public appearances. The crate was a dark beginning to a life destined for the spotlight. But shadows have a way of stretching, growing longer with each passing year. For Philip, those shadows became inseparable from his very identity, a haunting truth cloaked in royal silk. When Philip finally returned to Greece as a man, the ruins of his childhood were still smoldering. The streets whispered stories of violence and loss, but the real flames burned inside him. Memories too fierce for daylight, too dark for even the closest allies to see. He never forgot the crate, the cold wood pressing in like a shroud. It was a tomb and a cradle, a prison and a promise. A boy born into exile and shadow, carrying the weight of history in silence. The prince's story is one of paradox, a royal legacy forged in darkness and light. A boy hidden away from the world, yet destined to stand at its center. The crate was just the beginning of a journey that would span continents, wars, and haunted nights. And as the years turned, the shadows grew, whispering their secrets into the corridors of power. What began in that crate was never truly left behind. It followed Philip like a silent companion, shaping the man behind the crown. The tale of the crate is a chilling reminder that history often hides its darkest truths in the smallest, most fragile places. The child's exile carried more than just a name. It carried a shadow that would never fade. Even in his final days, long after the crate was left far behind, Philip could still hear the echoes of that night. The gunfire, the whispers, the cold wood pressing tight. A legacy of exile, fear, and the haunting silence of a boy locked away from the world. The old photograph hung crooked on the wall, edges curled and yellowed with time. In it, a young girl smiled brightly, her eyes alive with dreams and innocence. That girl was Princess Cecily, Philip's sister, whose fate would cast a long, dark shadow over the family. Her death was more than a tragedy. It was a wound that refused to heal. The roar of the plane's engines filled the sky, slicing through clouds like an angry beast. The aircraft, heavy with passengers and hope, soared toward its destination. Yet the heavens held a cruel secret that day. A sudden storm, fierce and unforgiving, would turn this journey into a nightmare none would forget. Inside the palace, Philip stared at the photograph, feeling the weight of loss pressing against his chest. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock, a cruel reminder of time moving forward while memories stayed trapped in the past. Cecily's smile seemed to fade, swallowed by the creeping darkness of grief. That night, the house seemed alive with whispers. The crackle of the fire mingled with faint, indistinct voices, as if the walls themselves remembered the screams and chaos. Philip's dreams became haunted by flames and distant cries, the echo of a life snatched away too soon. A sister lost in fire and wreckage. The official reports spoke of pilot error, mechanical failure, a tragic accident. But in the quiet corners of the palace, a different story was told. One of restless spirits and unanswered questions. Philip could almost hear Cecily calling out from the shadows, her voice a fragile thread connecting past to present. On the anniversary of the crash, the palace grew cold despite roaring fires. Servants whispered of strange occurrences, lights flickering without cause, doors creaking open, the faint scent of smoke lingering long after the flames had died. It was as if Cecily's spirit refused to be forgotten, tethered to the world she had left behind. Philip found himself drawn to the photograph more and more. He would sit for hours, tracing the lines of her face, searching for answers in eyes that held both joy and sorrow. Was it possible that the past still lived in those shadows? Could a memory be more than just a fading picture on a wall? The nights grew longer and heavier with each passing year. Philip's sleep was restless, filled with flickering images of fire and falling planes. Sometimes, he awoke with a start, heart pounding, convinced he heard the desperate pleas of children lost in the wreckage. The line between nightmare and memory blurred. One evening, a distant knocking came at the palace door. Philip opened it to find no one, just a cold breeze that whispered through the hall. The air carried a faint scent, burnt wood, smoke, and something undefined. It was a reminder that some losses refused to be silenced, lingering like smoke in empty rooms. Though the world outside moved on, inside the palace time stood still. The family mourned behind closed doors, their grief a fragile tapestry woven with pain and unanswered questions. For Philip, Cecily's death was a wound he could never touch but always felt, a silent echo that shaped his every step. In moments of solitude, he would speak softly to the photograph, as if hoping the bond of blood could bridge the gulf between life and death. His voice was a whisper, fragile and tentative, a son reaching out to a sister lost to the flames and the unforgiving sky. The crash was more than a headline. It was a scar on a family already battered by exile and war. The tragedy deepened the silence surrounding their past, layering grief upon the shadows that had already taken root in Philip's soul. It was a darkness that clung with relentless persistence. Memories of Cecily lingered not just in pictures but in the air, a haunting presence that refused to fade. Those who served the family spoke quietly of footsteps in empty halls, of distant laughter turning to sorrowful sighs. The palace was alive with ghosts, each carrying stories too painful to tell. Philip's own dreams carried her image, a flickering light in the darkness, a face that smiled even as the flames closed in. The line between love and loss, between memory and haunting, blurred in the quiet spaces of his heart. Cecily was both gone and present, a shadow he could neither embrace nor escape. He learned early that grief could become a living thing, twisting through the soul like a vine. The pain of losing a sibling in such a violent, sudden way was a burden that shaped his silence and his strength. The weight of that loss would follow him long after the flames had died out. Through the years, Philip's sorrow found strange companions, moments when the past seemed to bleed into the present. The flicker of a candle, a sudden chill, a whisper carried on the wind. The palace was a house of memories, haunted not only by ghosts but by the echoes of love lost too soon. In the quietest hours before dawn, Philip would sometimes walk the halls alone, tracing the path Cecily once walked. The silence wrapped around him like a shroud, and in those moments, the past seemed close enough to touch. It was a connection both painful and precious, a reminder that some bonds are never broken. The death of his sister was a chapter written in fire and sorrow, a mark on the family that no time could erase. For Philip, it was a shadow that shaped his youth and haunted his dreams, a reminder of fragility amid the power and privilege that defined his royal existence. And in the stillness of the palace, as the world slept unaware, the memory of Cecily whispered through the night, a fragile flame flickering against the darkness, a sister lost but never forgotten. The public gaze was relentless, watching every word, every gesture. Prince Philip, groomed for the crown yet burdened by shadows, often let slip remarks that cut deeper than intended. His words, sharp and unfiltered, sparked whispers and headlines, yet behind those barbs lay a restless soul, wrestling with his own inner demons. At grand events, surrounded by polished smiles, Philip's comments carried a sting, sometimes crude, sometimes painfully honest. A glance could turn cold, conversations hushed. Those close to him saw not just insensitivity, but a man trapped by the weight of history and his own unresolved fears. Each careless phrase was a blade, slicing not only others but his own spirit. The laughter that followed often masked something darker, a shadow creeping in, feeding on isolation and misunderstood anger. It was as if the very words he spoke trapped him in a cage of his own making. Behind closed doors, Philip grappled with guilt. The public persona was a mask, hiding a turbulent mind haunted by the past. His sharp tongue was sometimes a shield, sometimes a weapon against ghosts only he could see. Echoes of exile, loss, and the crate that defined his beginnings. Those around him felt the tension. Staff whispered about his moods. Sudden storms of sarcasm followed by long silences. Friends noticed the cracks beneath the regal facade. The man who wielded words like swords was himself a prisoner of shadows, caught between duty and despair. At times, Philip's remarks sparked outrage. Newspapers and politicians condemned his insensitivity. But few saw the turmoil beneath the surface. A man shaped by trauma, struggling to reconcile his heritage with the expectations of a modern world. His sharpness was both armor and burden. Rumors swirled, some painting him as a villain, others as a misunderstood figure battling unseen demons. The public's fascination grew, feeding on controversy and speculation. Yet behind the headlines, Philip's true struggle remained hidden, a silent war waged within. In private moments, Philip confided in rare trusted friends. His voice, stripped of sarcasm, revealed a man weighed down by history. The crate's darkness followed him still, its shadow casting long and cold. His harsh words were echoes of pain, fragments of a fractured soul seeking release. The contrast between public image and private anguish was stark. To some, Philip was merely the blunt prince, a figure of scandal and sharp wit. To others, he was a man haunted by exile and loss. His words a cry for understanding, drowned beneath layers of royal expectation. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath when Philip entered a room. His presence was commanding yet unpredictable. Conversations stopped, eyes lowered. He was both a symbol of tradition and a reminder of uncomfortable truths that no one dared speak aloud. Friends recalled moments of rare vulnerability. When Philip's facade slipped and the boy from the crate appeared, uncertain, burdened, longing for escape. Those fleeting glimpses revealed the man beneath the myth, caught in a relentless battle with his own history. Public missteps became part of his legacy. Each insensitive remark was dissected and debated, overshadowing quieter moments of compassion and loyalty. Yet the man behind the headlines remained a mystery, complex, contradictory, and deeply human. The sharpness of his tongue was a mirror to a restless mind, reflecting fears and frustrations rooted in a childhood sealed away in darkness. The crate was never far from his thoughts, a silent witness to the scars that shaped his words and deeds. Despite criticism, Philip's role was pivotal. He was both a relic of a fading era and a figure navigating the shifting tides of royalty in the modern world. His bluntness was a challenge to change, a reflection of inner conflict and unresolved pain. In rare interviews, Philip's words could surprise, moments of insight, humor, and reflection breaking through the tough exterior. These glimpses of authenticity offered a window into a man struggling to find his place amid the weight of history and expectation. Yet the shadows lingered. The crate's legacy was a ghost that followed him relentlessly, whispering in moments of doubt and anger. His remarks, often misunderstood, were fragments of a deeper story, one of exile, loss, and a quest for identity. Philip's sharp tongue was both shield and sword, protecting a wounded soul while cutting those around him. It was a paradox that defined much of his life, a tension between public duty and private struggle that few could truly grasp. Behind every controversial comment lay a man haunted by the past, grappling with ghosts that shaped his character and destiny. The crate was not just a symbol of exile, but a prism through which his words and actions could be understood. Those who knew Philip intimately spoke of a man who longed for connection, whose bluntness masked vulnerability. His remarks were cries from a soul wrestling with history, identity, and the shadows that refused to let go. In the end, Philip's legacy was as complex as the man himself, a tapestry woven with sharp words, deep wounds, and moments of unexpected tenderness. The crate's shadow was never far, casting its cold light on a life lived between darkness and duty. The night was thick with rain, the kind that blurred streetlights into shimmering halos. Prince Philip's car cut through the wet streets, headlights slicing the darkness like blades. The world outside was a blur of motion and sound, but inside, a quiet tension hummed beneath the surface, a prelude to the disaster that would change everything. The rain hammered the windshield, each drop a cold reminder of how fragile life could be. As the car approached a slick intersection, a sudden movement caught Philip's eye. Flash of headlights, a figure stepping into the road. Time seemed to slow. Seconds stretched thin, like fragile glass. A sharp turn, a screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal meeting flesh. Innocent lives collided with fate in a heartbeat. The world erupted into chaos screams, shattering glass, the smell of burning rubber. Philip sat frozen, shock rooting him to the driver's seat as emergency sirens wailed in the distance. Witnesses poured into the scene, faces etched with horror. Injured and frightened, they became part of a tragedy that refused to fade into the night. But for Philip, the accident was more than a collision. It was a fracture in time, a moment where fate's dark hand reached out to claim him. As paramedics rushed the wounded to waiting ambulances, Philip's thoughts spiraled. The faces of those harmed haunted him, strangers who had become unwilling victims of his mistake. The weight of responsibility crushed down like a stone, heavier than any title or crown he had ever known. In the days that followed, the accident became a storm of headlines and whispers. Questions swirled. How could a man of his stature be involved? What had led to such a catastrophic moment? Public opinion shifted like the weather, stormy, unforgiving, and relentless. Yet behind the media frenzy lay a deeper truth, a curse. Some whispered, cast by forces unseen. Philip felt the cold fingers of something ancient tracing his spine, a shadow creeping closer with each step he took. The accident was not merely a tragic event, but a turning point in a journey through darkness. Late at night, in the solitude of his chambers, Philip wrestled with guilt and fear. The faces of the injured flickered in his mind's eye, like ghostly apparitions, their pain a mirror to his own fractured soul. Sleep came in, fits haunted by nightmares of steel and screams. The accident shattered more than bones and glass. It fractured Philip's sense of self. The public scorn was a tide he could not stem, each wave eroding the carefully constructed image of a prince. The shadows of the crate seemed to lengthen, entwining with this new darkness born of blood and regret. He sought solace in solitude, retreating into the vast halls of the palace, where echoes of the past mingled with the present's heavy silence. The walls held stories of exile, loss, and whispered curses, stories Philip knew too well. The accident became another chapter in a life haunted by shadow. His closest confidants noticed a change, a deepening of the shadows behind his eyes, a silence that spoke louder than words. Philip was no longer just a man caught in public scandal. He was a soul wrestling with a burden that no title could lighten. The crate's darkness had found new ground. Amidst the storm of guilt, Philip sought redemption. Charitable acts and public apologies followed, attempts to heal wounds both visible and unseen. Yet the shadows clung stubbornly, a reminder that some scars run deeper than flesh and blood. The accident was a wound that time refused to close. In moments of quiet reflection, Philip wondered if fate was a cruel puppeteer, orchestrating tragedies to test the limits of the crate, the exile, the loss of siblings, and now this accident, all threads woven into a tapestry of suffering and survival. The question lingered. Could a man ever truly escape his past? The palace itself seemed to absorb his anguish. Rooms once filled with light grew dim, corners heavy with silence. Servants whispered of strange sounds, soft sobs in empty halls, footsteps echoing without source. The shadows of the accident blended with those of exile, creating a darkness almost palpable. Philip's nightmares became more vivid, scenes replaying with merciless clarity. He saw the crash again and again, the twisting metal, the frightened faces, the sharp cries. Each replay was a blow, a reminder that some moments refuse to be forgotten, no matter how far one runs. The media dubbed it a royal tragedy, a phrase that masked the deeper pain beneath. To Philip, it was a personal apocalypse, a moment when the weight of history and fate converged with a single misstep. The accident was a dark turning point, casting long shadows over the final chapters of his life. Amidst public scrutiny, Philip's private world contracted. Relationships frayed under pressure. Trust became fragile. The prince who once navigated courts and ceremonies with ease now faced an inner exile, a solitary confinement of guilt and regret. The crate's legacy echoed louder than ever. Counselors and confidants offered support, but the darkness was stubborn. Philip's mind became a battlefield where past and present collided. Ghosts of childhood exile clashed with the haunting aftermath of the accident. Each day was a struggle against the shadows closing in. Yet even in this darkness, glimmers of resilience shone through. Philip's will to endure, to confront his demons, was a testament to the human spirit's tenacity. The accident had shattered much, but it had not extinguished the faint pulse of hope that still flickered beneath the surface. In the quiet moments before dawn, Philip often stood by the window, gazing at a world he felt increasingly disconnected from. The rain streaked the glass, blurring the line between inside and out, reality and nightmare. The crate's shadows whispered reminders of a past that would never fully release him. The accident's aftermath was a mirror to the exile that had defined his earliest days, a reminder that some darknesses are inescapable, no matter the years that pass. Philip's life was a testament to this harsh truth, a story woven with pain, regret, and the search for peace. As the years moved on, the memory of the accident became another ghost in the palace's long corridors. It whispered in the silence, haunted the corners, and lingered in Philip's heart. The crate's shadow had found a new companion, a darkness born of metal and rain, etched into the final chapters of his journey. The night's events clung to Philip like a shroud, refusing to lift no matter how fiercely he tried to shake it off. Each time he closed his eyes, the twisted wreckage played behind his eyelids, a relentless film that neither time nor prayer could erase. The weight of what had happened pressed down, heavier than any crown or duty. Outside the palace walls, the world debated his fate. Headlines ran wild with accusations, sympathy, and judgment, but none captured the private torment that gripped the man behind the title. The accident was a fracture in his life's narrative, a moment where history, personal tragedy, and fate collided with cruel precision. His nights became battles against memories that refused to fade. Sleep was a fragile refuge, shattered by flashbacks of screams and flashing lights. Sometimes, he would wake gasping for breath, trapped once again in the chaos of that rainy night. The crate's darkness seemed to seep into his dreams, turning them into prisons of regret. Philip's silence grew thicker as the weeks passed. Public appearances became rare, and when they happened, his smiles felt forced, eyes distant. The accident was no longer just an event. It was a specter haunting every step, a reminder that no matter the title, no one escapes the consequences of fate's cruel twists. In private, he sought comfort in routine, long walks through the palace gardens, the quiet companionship of trusted aides, and the solace of history books that connected him to a world beyond immediate pain. Yet even in these moments, the shadows lingered, whispering of past sins and future fears. Counseling sessions offered a tentative path toward healing, but the road was steep and winding. Philip confronted layers of grief. For the lives affected, for his fractured reputation, and for the boy in the crate whose exile had never truly ended. Each session peeled back a layer of silence, revealing wounds, old and new. Despite the darkness, Philip found moments of clarity. He began to understand that the accident was not just a punishment but a catalyst, forcing him to confront the shadows he had long tried to ignore. The crate's legacy, the loss of family, and now this tragedy were threads woven into a tapestry of survival and transformation. The palace, once a fortress of tradition and ceremony, became a place of quiet reflection and whispered prayers. Philip's footsteps echoed in empty corridors, a solitary rhythm underscoring the loneliness that had settled deep within. The accident had reshaped not only his life but the very walls that contained it. Friends reached out cautiously, some offering support, others stepping back in fear of the storm that seemed to follow him. Trust became a fragile commodity, strained by the weight of public scrutiny and personal remorse. Philip's world had contracted to a narrow path between shadow and light. Media scrutiny intensified as the investigation unfolded. Legal battles and public inquiries added layers of stress, each headline another reminder of a moment he wished he could erase. Yet amidst the noise, Philip sought a quieter truth, a way to reconcile his past with a future still uncertain. In the midst of turmoil, a rare letter arrived from a distant relative. A small gesture of kindness and understanding. It reminded Philip that even in the darkest nights flickers of light could appear. The crate's shadow was long, but so was the human capacity for hope and connection. As months turned into years, Philip's wounds began to heal, though scars remained. The accident was a defining moment, but not the end. It became part of a larger story, one of exile, loss, and the relentless pursuit of peace in a world that often seemed unforgiving. The car accident was a stark reminder that history is not just written in books or on walls, but lived in moments of crisis and consequence. For Philip, it was a chapter that deepened the shadows, but also illuminated the resilience beneath. In the quiet aftermath, Philip stood once more by the window, rain tracing paths down the glass like tears. The crate's darkness was still with him, but now tempered by a fragile hope that even the deepest shadows could someday give way to light. The ancestral portraits hung silently on the palace walls, faces frozen in time, staring down from gilded frames with cold eyes. Among them were shadows far darker than the heavy velvet curtains could hide. Secrets of allegiance and silence woven into the very fabric of a family's legacy. The whispers of Nazi links were a shadow that never fully lifted. History is never clean, especially when it intersects with power and survival. Philip's family tree twisted into tangled branches, some bearing fruit too bitter to swallow. Connections to Nazi Germany were not merely rumors, but threads rooted in wartime alliances, entangled. Loyalties that history books dared only hint at. For Philip, these truths were ghosts, silent but insistent. They hovered at the edges of conversations, behind closed doors, where the weight of legacy pressed down like iron. The palace halls held their breath, burdened by the knowledge that some alliances, however inconvenient, had shaped a path he could not easily escape. The revelations came slowly, like flickers of light through a storm. Old letters, hidden documents, and hushed testimonies painted a portrait of a family walking a precarious line between survival and complicity. These secrets were not just historical footnotes but living shadows that clung to Philip's name. In the quiet of the library, Philip sifted through faded papers, the yellowed pages whispering stories of a past he wished he could rewrite. Each line was a reminder that history's shadows often stretch longer than the daylight can reach. A reminder that the crate's darkness was part of a much larger, more tangled web. Outside the palace, the world was changing rapidly. The horrors of the Second World War were still fresh wounds, and any hint of Nazi sympathy was met with suspicion and scorn. For Philip, the revelations threatened not just reputation but identity, the fragile balance between a royal heritage and a past steeped in moral ambiguity. Those closest to him advised silence, caution, and careful management of the family's image. But silence was a double-edged sword. Each unspoken secret festered beneath the surface, poisoning relationships and deepening the rift between public perception and private truth. Philip's nights grew restless. Shadows seemed to gather in the corners of his mind, taking shape in nightmares where figures cloaked in darkness whispered accusations and curses. The crate's suffocating memory mingled with these new specters, binding past and present in a relentless grip. Public inquiries and investigative journalists began probing deeper, uncovering more links and connections. The palace walls could no longer contain the growing storm. Questions surfaced, uncomfortable, persistent, and impossible to ignore. For Philip, it was a reckoning long overdue. Amid the turmoil, family dinners grew tense. Conversations were guarded, eyes flickering with unspoken fears. The legacy of Nazi ties was a wound too raw to discuss openly, yet impossible to deny. The crate's shadow was no longer just a symbol of exile, but part of a darker inheritance that demanded confrontation. Philip wrestled with guilt and confusion. How could loyalty to family coexist with the knowledge of such troubling pasts? The lines between victim and participant blurred, and the quest for understanding became a journey through moral shadows that tested the very core of his identity. In rare moments of vulnerability, Philip confided in trusted allies. His voice was heavy with regret and the weight of history. The past was not just a story to be told, but a burden to be carried, one that shaped his actions and haunted his dreams. The palace archives became a prison of secrets, filled with documents that offered no easy answers. Each revelation was a step deeper into a labyrinth of history, where truth and denial danced in uneasy partnership. The crate's darkness was now entwined with the shadows of complicity and survival. Public opinion fluctuated, some expressing outrage, others reluctant to judge a family caught in the tides of war and politics. The narrative was complex, layered with nuance that defied simple condemnation. For Philip, navigating this landscape was a constant struggle between defense and accountability. The media spotlight intensified, and with it came renewed scrutiny. Every gesture, every statement was analyzed through the lens of these revelations. Philip became a symbol not just of royalty but of a past many wanted to forget but could not escape. Despite the storm, Philip sought to reclaim his narrative. Efforts were made to acknowledge mistakes and distance the family from the darkest chapters of history. Yet the shadows remained, reminders that history's ghosts are persistent and often unforgiving. At times, Philip found solace in history itself, in understanding the forces that shaped his ancestors and, by extension, himself. The crate's memory was a starting point, but the family's Nazi ties were a mirror reflecting the complexities of identity, power, and survival in a turbulent century. Conversations with historians and experts became a source of insight and frustration. The past was a puzzle with missing pieces, a story half told and often misunderstood. Philip grappled with these fragments, seeking clarity in a landscape shrouded in fog and contradiction. The palace itself seemed to bear the weight of these secrets. Its halls echoed with footsteps that belonged to ghosts of loyalty and betrayal, courage, and cowardice. The legacy of Nazi links was a silent presence, a reminder that power often comes at a cost too high to measure. Philip's public speeches began to reflect a more cautious tone. Acknowledging the past without becoming imprisoned by it was a delicate balance. His words sought to bridge divides, to offer a path toward understanding and healing amid the lingering shadows. Behind the scenes, family members wrestled with their own roles in this unfolding drama. The crate's exile was a shared experience, but the legacy of Nazi ties was a fracture that threatened to divide as much as it defined. The quest for truth was as much about reconciliation as revelation. As the years passed, the legacy of these dark chapters became part of the historical record, a cautionary tale of power, identity, and the shadows that lurk in the corners of history. For Philip, it was a burden and a challenge, to live beyond the crate's darkness and the family's troubled past. The journey was far from over. The shadows of Nazi links were woven into the fabric of his life and legacy, demanding acknowledgement and reflection. Yet within this darkness lay the possibility of redemption, a chance to confront history with courage and truth. Philip's story was no longer just about exile or accident. It was a complex tapestry of light and shadow, truth and denial, love and loss. The crate's memory was a beginning, but the family's Nazi ties were a haunting echo that reverberated through time. The past was a heavy companion, but Philip faced it with a resolve born of experience and introspection. The journey through history's darkest corners was painful, but necessary. In facing these shadows, he sought not only understanding but a path forward. The family's Nazi ties were a reminder that history is never simple, and the legacies of power are often entwined with darkness. For Philip, the challenge was to live with these truths and to find meaning beyond the shadows that had long defined him. And so, the crate's shadow grew deeper, entwined now with the echoes of history's most troubling chapters. But within that darkness, a flicker of light persisted, a testament to the enduring human spirit and the possibility of redemption. The silence of the convent was a stark contrast to the chaos that had once filled Alice of Battenberg's life. Her steps echoed through cold stone corridors, a fragile shadow of the woman she once was. Mental illness had woven a web of isolation around her, and abandonment became the echo that haunted both mother and son. Philip's earliest memories were tinged with the absence of a mother who had slipped away into darkness. Her mind, fractured by unseen torment, retreated behind walls no child could breach. The woman who had once held him close became a ghost, distant and unreachable, lost in a labyrinth of sorrow and silence. In the quiet hours of night, Philip would lie awake, haunted by the soft sounds of her absence, the faintest whisper of a voice. A sigh carried on the wind, reminders that the bond between them had been severed, not by choice, but by a cruel twist of fate. The crate that had held him as a baby seemed small compared to the void left by her departure. Letters from the convent arrived sporadically, brittled with time and pain. Words struggled to bridge a gulf that had widened with each passing year. Philip's heart ached for a connection lost to madness and silence, a mother's love trapped behind convent walls and broken memories. The palace whispered of Alice's decline. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of a princess consumed by her own demons, retreating into prayer and solitude. Her abandonment was a wound that cut deep, a silent scar etched into the family's history and Philip's soul. Philip's childhood was marked by the dual weight of exile and loss. The crate that symbolized his physical confinement was mirrored by the emotional imprisonment wrought by his mother's absence. His world was shaped not only by history, but by the fragile threads of love and neglect. At times, the shadows in Philip's mind took the form of his mother's face, pale, distant, and unseeing. In dreams, she reached out, a silent plea for understanding and connection. But waking life offered no answers, only the cold reality of abandonment. The convent's walls were both sanctuary and prison for Alice. Inside, she battled the ghosts of her past and the torment of her illness. Outside, her son grappled with the loneliness left in her wake, a solitude that no crown or title could dispel. Philip's caregivers became surrogate parents, filling roles no one should have to assume. Their love was steadfast, but could not replace the bond severed by mental illness. The absence of his mother shaped not just his childhood, but the man he would become. The palace's grand halls often felt emptier than their vastness suggested. Without Alice's guiding presence, the family's structure faltered. Philip's sense of belonging was fractured, a puzzle missing its most vital piece, a mother's steady love and protection. His education was a refuge, a place where knowledge offered escape from emotional turmoil. Yet even in classrooms filled with learning, Philip wrestled with feelings of abandonment and confusion. The crate's darkness was now joined by a maternal void that echoed through his formative years. Occasionally, Philip would visit the convent, a journey fraught with pain and hope. Seeing his mother, fragile and distant, was both balm and wound. Their interactions were marked by silences heavier than words, moments where past and present collided in bittersweet tension. Family members urged distance, fearing that the visits might reopen wounds too deep to heal. But Philip's heart demanded connection, a longing to reclaim what had been lost to illness and time. The crate's shadow mingled with the ache of maternal absence, shaping his inner world. As years passed, Philip's understanding of mental illness grew, tempered by personal experience. The stigma surrounding his mother's condition added layers of isolation, forcing him to navigate a world that often judged rather than understood. His own struggles with identity were inseparable from this hidden legacy. The palace's history books rarely told of Alice's battle, preferring to focus on crowns and ceremonies. Yet for Philip, her story was central, a tale of loss and resilience, abandonment, and the quiet strength found in surviving broken bonds. The crate's darkness was inseparable from the echoes of a mother's silence. At night, Philip sometimes imagined conversations that never happened, words of comfort, apologies, and love, exchanged in the safety of dreams. These imagined moments were fragile lifelines, reminders that, even in absence, a mother's influence could endure. The emotional scars left by Alice's mental illness shaped Philip's relationships throughout his life. Trust and vulnerability were battlegrounds where past wounds resurfaced. The crate's shadow intertwined with the pain of abandonment, creating a complex tapestry of longing and defense. Despite the void, Philip sought to honor his mother's memory in subtle ways. Acts of charity and quiet reflection became his way of bridging the gap left by silence. The crate's legacy was a reminder that even in darkness, light could be found through compassion and understanding. The palace gardens became a place of solace, where Philip could confront his memories amid nature's quiet beauty. Here, the weight of abandonment lifted briefly, replaced by a fragile peace that only moments of solitude could provide. The crate's shadow softened in the embrace of green and sky. In rare moments, Philip spoke openly about his mother's illness, breaking the silence that had surrounded it for decades. His voice carried the hope that understanding could replace stigma, and that pain, once shared, could be eased. The crate's darkness was a burden, but also a catalyst for empathy. The convent remained a distant place, a symbol of both loss and sanctuary. For Alice, it was a refuge from her torment. For Philip, a reminder of the love and absence intertwined in his earliest years. The crate that once enclosed him was now a metaphor for emotional confinement, shaped by his mother's struggle. Family gatherings were often shadowed by unspoken grief. Alice's absence was a silent presence, felt in empty seats and hushed conversations. The crate's legacy was not just physical exile but the emotional chasm left by a mother's withdrawal into illness. Philip's later life was marked by a quiet determination to break free from the chains of abandonment. The crate's darkness was a starting point, but the journey toward healing required facing the wounds left by maternal absence head-on. It was a path fraught with pain but also possibility. As the years passed, Philip found ways to reconcile with his past. Memories of Alice, though tinged with sorrow, became part of a larger narrative of survival and resilience. The crate's shadow remained, but it was no longer the sole defining force in his life. In the twilight of his years, Philip reflected on the complex legacy of his mother's mental illness. It was a story of love lost and found in fragments, a testament to the human capacity to endure and forgive. The crate's darkness had shaped him, but it had not destroyed him. His story, like that of many touched by mental illness and abandonment, was one of struggle and hope. The shadows of the past loomed large, but within them flickered the possibility of light, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could find healing over time. Philip's reflections often drifted to moments long past, simple memories, tinted by absence. The lullabies his mother never sang, the embraces she could no longer offer. Those voids left invisible scars that shaped his understanding of love and loss. The crate of his infancy wasn't just a physical prison. It symbolized the emotional cages built by abandonment and silence. He recalled the cold mornings, when caretakers would gently rouse him, their faces a mix of compassion and sadness. They did their best, but they could never replace the warmth of a mother's touch. His childhood was a mosaic of fragmented affections, where every piece was tinged with longing for what had been taken away by mental illness. The palace was often a place of loneliness despite its grandeur. The echo of footsteps on marble floors reminded Philip that even surrounded by people, isolation could persist. The absence of maternal love left a hollow space that ceremonies and royal duties could never fill. The Krate's shadow was more than metaphor, it was a persistent presence in his life. Even as he grew older, the specter of abandonment followed Philip into adulthood. Relationships were complex and fraught, colored by fears of loss and rejection. He sought connection but guarded himself against vulnerability, the wounds inflicted by his mother's absence shaping his emotional landscape profoundly. Therapy and counseling became part of his attempt to heal, a slow and often painful process of confronting the past. He grappled with feelings of guilt, anger, and sadness, emotions that no royal protocol could neatly resolve. The Krate's darkness was a reminder that some wounds cut far deeper than the eye could see. Philip's compassion for others was deeply influenced by his experiences. He understood suffering not as a distant concept but as a lived reality. This empathy fueled his charitable work and quiet acts of kindness, ways to bridge the gaps left by his own fractured beginnings and to offer solace where he once found none. Letters from distant relatives and old friends sometimes brought news of Alice, a faint thread connecting past and present. Though she remained in the convent, far removed from the royal spotlight, her presence lingered in Philip's thoughts, a complex figure caught between fragility and strength, madness and love. His personal writings revealed a man wrestling with contradictions, the desire to honor his mother's memory alongside the pain of her absence. The Krate's legacy was not simply a tale of exile but a narrative interwoven with themes of forgiveness, resilience, and the enduring search for belonging. In public, Philip maintained a composed facade, a testament to the discipline ingrained in him since childhood. But behind the scenes, he navigated a labyrinth of emotions, haunted by the echo of maternal silence. The Krate's shadow shaped both the man he presented to the world and the one hidden beneath. As time went on, Philip's understanding of mental illness deepened, moving beyond stigma toward acceptance. He became an advocate, using his platform to raise awareness and challenge misconceptions. The Krate's darkness, once a source of pain, transformed into a beacon of hope for others facing similar struggles. The palace garden became a metaphorical sanctuary, where Philip sought peace amid turmoil. The gentle rustling of leaves and the warmth of sunlight offered respite from the heavy shadows of his past. In nature's quiet embrace, the Krate's shadow softened, replaced by moments of clarity and renewal. In his final years, Philip reflected openly on the profound impact of his mother's illness and absence. He spoke with humility and candor, recognizing that understanding and compassion were essential for healing. The Krate's legacy, intertwined with abandonment, became a story of survival rather than defeat. His journey was emblematic of the human condition marked by loss, resilience, and the relentless quest for connection. The shadows cast by mental illness and abandonment were formidable, but Philip's life illuminated the possibility of growth and reconciliation amid darkness. The narrative of Philip's life could not be disentangled from the complex legacy of his mother's struggles. It was a testament to the enduring bonds of family, even when fractured by pain and distance. The Krate's shadow was a powerful symbol, but it was not the sum of his existence. Through his experiences, Philip came to understand the multifaceted nature of love and loss. The absence of a mother shaped his identity, but it also fueled a determination to forge meaningful relationships and to extend kindness where he once felt none. In the grand tapestry of history, Philip's story stood as a poignant chapter one that challenged notions of strength and vulnerability. The Krate's darkness was a starting point, illuminating the path through trauma, toward healing and acceptance. His legacy, shaped by the interplay of abandonment and endurance, offered a message of hope. Even in the most profound shadows, the human spirit could find ways to heal, connect, and thrive. The Krate's shadow remained, but it was now balanced by light. Philip's life was a journey through silence and sound, absence and presence, despair and hope. The echoes of his mother's mental illness reverberated across decades, influencing his path but never defining his ultimate story. In the quiet moments of reflection, Philip found peace in the knowledge that love, though complicated and sometimes lost, could also be found anew. The Krate that had once held him was a symbol not just of confinement but of survival and transformation. As the chapter of abandonment closed, a new narrative emerged, one of understanding, forgiveness, and the enduring power of family. The shadows that had loomed so large were now tempered by the light of acceptance. Prince Philip's public persona was a complex tapestry, one that blended duty with moments that unsettled even the most loyal observers. Behind the polished facade lay a man whose sharp tongue and insensitive remarks often pierced the public's perception like cold daggers. These moments revealed a darker, more troubling side of the man behind the crown. His comments, sometimes laced with racial undertones, or ill-considered jokes, became the source of controversy and discomfort. What many saw as unfiltered honesty, others viewed as careless cruelty. Yet beneath the words was a man wrestling with his own internal shadows, a legacy shaped by exile, loss, and unspoken pain. To the public, these remarks were jarring, often overshadowing decades of service. They raised questions about the gap between image and reality, between the duties of royalty and the imperfections of the man himself. The Crate's shadow lingered here, manifesting not just in silence but in words that cut deeply. Behind closed doors, those who knew Philip spoke of a man shaped by hardship and survival. The harshness of his upbringing, the exile, and the loss had carved deep lines into his character. His bluntness was sometimes a shield, a way to mask vulnerability beneath layers of deflection and bravado. Each insensitive remark left a wound not only on others but on Philip himself. The words were like echoes in a cavern, bouncing back with sharpness that wounded the speaker as much as the listener. The Crate's darkness found a new form, the self-inflicted pain of misunderstood intentions and fractured relationships. Public apologies came, often reluctant and weighed with royal decorum. Yet the damage lingered, a reminder that words, once spoken, cannot be undone. The prince's personality became a battleground between candidness and diplomacy, with the Crate's shadow lurking in the tensions between the two. Media outlets seized on these moments, amplifying the controversy and fueling debates about race, privilege, and power. Philip became a symbol of a bygone era, where outdated attitudes clashed with modern sensibilities. The Crate's legacy was visible here, a man struggling to reconcile a turbulent past with the evolving demands of the present. In private conversations, Philip's closest confidants described a man aware of his flaws yet trapped by them. His sharp tongue was both weapon and curse, a means of control and a source of isolation. The Crate's shadow manifested as a restless tension between desire for connection and fear of vulnerability. The prince's remarks were not random but rooted in a worldview shaped by history and personal experience. Yet this context did little to soften the impact. Each careless phrase added to a growing list of grievances, eroding the goodwill built over decades of public service. Philip's personality was a paradox. At once charismatic and abrasive, devoted yet divisive, his outspokenness challenged the polished image expected of royalty, but also exposed the human frailty beneath. The Crate's darkness was evident in these contradictions, reflecting the scars of a life marked by exile and loss. Family gatherings were sometimes strained by the fallout of these remarks. Loved ones sought to mediate the damage, offering counsel and caution. The Crate's shadow extended into these moments, a reminder that the prince's words carried weight far beyond casual conversation. Despite the controversies, Philip remained a devoted husband and father in his own way. His public missteps contrasted with private acts of loyalty and care, revealing a complexity often missed by the headlines. The Crate's legacy was not simply a story of flaws, but one of resilience amid contradiction. Over time, the prince showed moments of reflection and growth. Acknowledging the hurt caused by his words, he sought to temper his bluntness with greater awareness. The Crate's darkness was not a permanent prison, but a challenge to be met with humility and change. The public's response was mixed. Some viewed his apologies as sincere steps toward reconciliation, while others remained skeptical. The prince's personality, shaped by exile and shadow, was a mirror for society's own struggles with prejudice and forgiveness. Philip's legacy, therefore, was entwined with these complexities. The Crate's shadow was visible not only in silence and secrecy but in speech, in words that wounded, healed, and revealed the messy humanity beneath royal expectations. In the final analysis, Philip's insensitive remarks were a window into the tensions between past and present, between the man and the myth. The Crate's darkness had many faces, and one of the most painful was the struggle to communicate without harm. This chapter of his life reminds us that no one is beyond flaw, and that understanding the full story requires grappling with uncomfortable truths. The Crate's legacy is not just about exile or silence, but about the imperfect ways we all navigate identity and connection. The night was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred the edges of the world. Prince Philip's car moved cautiously along a dimly lit road, a route he had traveled many times before. But this night would mark a turning point, a moment when fate's cold hand reached out with devastating force. As the vehicle rounded a sharp bend, headlights suddenly caught a figure stepping onto the road. Time seemed to slow, breaths caught in throats, decisions made in split seconds. The impact was brutal, shattering calm into chaos. Lives changed forever in an instant. Emergency sirens pierced the night as bystanders rushed to the scene. The victims, strangers in that moment, became the center of a storm swirling with fear, confusion, and sorrow. Philip stood nearby, shaken but composed, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. The accident sent shockwaves through the public and the palace alike. Questions flew like sparks in the dark. How had this happened? Could it have been prevented? The incident was not just a tragic event, but a catalyst for reflection and reckoning within Philip's life. In the days that followed, Philip grappled with a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, regret, and a haunting sense of being pursued by something unseen. The crate's shadow, a metaphor for his lifelong burdens, seemed to stretch anew, wrapping tightly around his conscience. The legal and media scrutiny was intense. Every detail dissected, every action scrutinized under a harsh spotlight. The public's patience wore thin, and the palace faced a rare moment of vulnerability. The car accident was more than an incident. It was a crack in the royal armor. Behind closed doors, Philip wrestled with the accident's aftermath. Counseling and quiet conversations became his refuge, a way to confront the silent storm raging within. The crate's darkness morphed into a gnawing anxiety, a badua, an unspoken curse that followed his every step. Victims and their families sought answers and justice. Their pain was raw and real, a human face to the tragedy that unfolded in seconds. Philip's interactions with them were marked by awkwardness and sorrow, a reminder that public figures are not immune to the consequences of their actions. The accident ignited discussions about responsibility, privilege, and the limits of royal immunity. It exposed fissures in a system long thought untouchable. For Philip, it was a moment of profound reckoning, a reminder that no one, regardless of status, is above accountability. In the months after the accident, Philip's public appearances were carefully managed. The palace sought to balance transparency with dignity, a delicate dance in the court of public opinion. The crate's shadow was a constant companion, reminding him of the fragile line between power and vulnerability. Philip's own reflections deepened. He acknowledged the accident as a pivotal event, a moment that challenged his sense of self and purpose. The crate's darkness had haunted him since childhood, but now it manifested in new, tangible consequences. The royal family rallied, offering support but also urging caution. The accident's fallout tested bonds and exposed tensions beneath the surface. The crate's legacy was no longer confined to history. It was alive in the present, demanding attention and response. Public sympathy was divided. Some viewed Philip as a victim of circumstance, others as a symbol of royal entitlement. The accident became a prism through which broader societal debates about class and justice were refracted. The crate's shadow illuminated not just personal but public fault lines. Despite the turmoil, Philip sought ways to make amends. Charitable engagements focused on road safety and accident prevention became a way to channel regret into action. The crate's darkness, once a source of despair, became a catalyst for change and responsibility. In quiet moments, Philip wrestled with the possibility of forgiveness. From victims, from the public, and ultimately from himself. The crate's shadow was heavy, but he understood that healing required confronting pain rather than burying it. The accident left an indelible mark on Philip's legacy. It was a chapter filled with sorrow and complexity, a reminder that even the most privileged lives are vulnerable to tragedy. The crate's darkness was not erased but transformed, woven into a narrative of accountability and humanity. As years passed, the memory of the accident lingered, but did not define Philip's entire story. He continued to navigate the complexities of public life with a renewed sense of purpose, mindful of the lessons learned in that fog-shrouded night. The crate's shadow, once a symbol of exile and childhood trauma, now stood as a metaphor for the enduring challenges of life. The unexpected turns, the heavy burdens, and the possibility of redemption. Through reckoning, Philip's journey through this dark chapter was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The car accident was a painful reminder of mortality and consequence, but also a catalyst for growth and reflection. In the end, the night of the accident became more than a moment of tragedy. It was a turning point. For Philip, it was an invitation to face his shadows head-on and to seek a path forward amid the darkness.